Доброго вечора, шановні колеги. Так, ви вже побачили, що в нас іде запис лекції. Всіх вітаю. Ви вже знаєте, що ця лекція буде на записі, і ви зможете побачити і потім посилання YouTube, яке ми вам надамо. Ми вас вітаємо на другій лекції Школи доброго врядування, організованої мережею захисту національних інтересів АНС. Мене звати Ліза, я вже представилася, у нас координаторок школи, і сьогодні з нами буде пан Бенджамін Шмітт зі своєю чудовою лекцією про contemporary views на енергетичну політику Європейського Союзу і також українську energy resilience. Лекція буде відбуватися англійською мовою. Якщо у вас рівень англійської мови, який дозволяє прослухати лекцію, ви можете спокійно слухати її, як є, але якщо вам потрібен переклад, з нами є чудова пані Кристина сьогодні, яка буде перекладати лекцію українською, і знизу в зумі буде така кнопочка як з планеткою, ви можете натиснути на неї, і переклад автоматично включиться вам. Якщо у вас є якісь технічні проблеми і так далі, можете написати в чаті. Лекція триватиме приблизно годинку. Після виступу пана Бенджаміна ми запустимо сесію питань та відповідей. Ви можете або підняти ручку, це теж функція, яку ви можете знайти в Zoom, або ж написати питання в чат. Ви можете написати питання англійською або українською, як вам зручно, і потім, якщо ви не захочете піднімати руку, ми їх просто подублюємо пану Бенджаміну. Я думаю, що з цим все зрозуміло. Якщо ні, можете писати в чат або в нашу телеграм-групу. І right now I'm switching to English. Dear Benjamin, thank you again for joining us. Honestly, I'm thrilled for the topic of the lecture. So very glad to hear from you. And now I give you the word.
Okay, are we good? I know there's interpretation going on. Is it okay if I speak in English now, or?
Yeah, that's
okay,
perfect.
good, because I will have trouble doing this in Ukrainian, but I appreciate that there will be simultaneous interpretation. Hello, everybody. Can I let me share my? Oh, can I be made a co-host so I can share my screen?
Yes, you can try.
Okay. Okay, can everybody see that? Great. Well, thank you so much, Lisa. Thank you to everybody in the organization, Ostap, Hannah, everyone, good old friends, new friends, everybody. So great to be here. I wish I was with you in Kyiv now. I'm hoping to get out there at sometime before the end of this year and meet some of you. But for now, I'm here at the University of Pennsylvania in Philadelphia. As I said, it's 11 a.m. in the morning here, and glad to be seeing you all in the evening for an evening lecture. I know it's Friday evening, so we'll try to have this be as exciting and fun as possible as we go through the lecture. And I just want to say I'd love this to be a discussion. If there are questions, please use the raise hand feature and or put questions in the chat. You know, Lisa, if you want to let me know if there's other questions that are coming through, or just interrupt me, that's totally fine. I'll ask a few questions since this is a lecture with students, etc. So I'll get to have the professor prerogative here, I guess, and ask a little bit. So not just a commercial deal, contemporary trends in European energy security and sanctions policy. This is the broad topic that I'd like to talk about today. I'd like to set a framework over the first 20 minutes or so of the tools that we have to talk about these issues, and then hear from you about about what your thoughts are on European energy security, on Ukrainian energy resiliency, and then take the rest of the time for a discussion on what we can do more to help protect Ukrainian critical infrastructure, especially as we go into another heating season, starting in just a few months' time. Starting with this, however, je suis né en pipe. I'm not a French speaker, I can try, but this is not a pipe. Rene Magritte's famous saying about his painting of a pipe, surrealist painting. But Nord Stream 2 also not a pipe, not literally, or literally is a pipe, but is certainly much more than that. That's why I always say it's not just a commercial deal. We'll get into that a little bit later. So chapter 1, not just a commercial deal, a structural view of European energy security. I'll skip over the summary as we'll just go through this today, but I want to give a public service announcement first, just because of, you heard where I'm coming from. I'm a physicist by training, and my belief is that we need more scientists to join in the foreign policy and national security process on both sides of the Atlantic, and that includes certainly in Ukraine. And I think we've certainly seen that with the incredible engineering and technology innovators that have been supporting Ukrainian brave armed forces on the front lines through innovation throughout Ukraine. So certainly that's well taken in Ukraine itself. But I think that for the rest of the transatlantic community, we need to get our act together, get more A, scientists involved, and B, get more policymakers to bring science analysis into their thought process. But anyways, my background, I did my PhD here at Penn, building telescopes in northern Chile, in the Atacama Desert, up at 5,190 meters, so very high altitude telescopes doing early universe cosmology. In 2014, I was sitting on this volcano, extinct volcano called Ceratoco, and reading live the news unfolding, as unbelievable as it may have seemed in real time, that Ukraine was being attacked maliciously by the Russian Federation, first in Crimea and then in the Donbass. And at that point, I started having conversations about trying to get involved in at the State Department, and lo and behold, just a year later, in August 2015, I got a fellowship to start work on European energy security issues, starting with Nordic-Baltic security. And 2 weeks after I started, the Nord Stream 2 pipeline was announced. So I ended up working on these issues for 4 years at the State Department in Washington, from 2015 through 2019, opposing not only Nord Stream 2, but broader Russian malign energy activities and Russian weaponization of energy, in particular against Ukraine. That certainly continued to be my focus. I was in Ukraine many times for work travel and meetings, but also spent part of the summer of 2018 in Ukraine doing work and working from our embassy in supporting the Ukrainian energy resiliency to the greatest extent possible. After that, I left. I got a job offer at Harvard to do astrophysics work at the South Pole. So went down to Antarctica. As you can see on the right side, on the way, you get to see some penguins, and then finally get down to the South Pole, where there's absolutely nothing except for our telescopes and some other instrumentation. And then earlier this year, got an offer to come here to Penn to build this guy, that's part of the telescope, but a much larger telescope in Chile, and also at the same time do European energy security research, which is what I'm doing here at the Kleinman Center for Energy Policy. So as I said, did work at the State Department on the left, working on Ukrainian energy resiliency, including meetings at the Bankova would recognize folks there. And then on the right, of course, warning the rest of Europe not to build Nord Stream 2 and to speak out against this, using not only policy arguments, but the technical and legal arguments as well that are so important to inform our policy. Ultimately, last year, after Russia's large-scale invasion of Ukraine, was called to testify before U.S. Congress on increasing Russia sanctions, in particular energy sanctions, and countering strategic corruption and the Schroederization of Europe and elite capture. Testified before Congress, and 2 weeks later was sanctioned by the Russian Federation for the courtesy of speaking out against them. So have basically done a lot of this work in a lot of different areas over the years, and the reason I'm doing this is I want to show you, what do careers in energy security look like. I keep telling my students, I'm teaching a course on European energy security this semester, and we've met a number of times already. And 70% of all energy security work is research. It doesn't necessarily have to be done in a library, but it is reading, it is analysis, it is getting smart on these issues and getting really in depth in the details, so that you then can go out either into the field and see energy infrastructure. Those are pictures on the left. The bottom left is the Estonian LNG terminal that's under construction called the Paldiski LNG terminal. I was there about 5 weeks ago. And then I'll just give a plug to our telescope in Chile, where I was last week building a weather station for a new renewable energy power plant that we're building down there. So that's a to be continued project. So these are the sort of things that get involved with infrastructure and or do diplomacy. On the same trip I was at the Paldiski terminal in Estonia, I stopped in Slovakia and met with the Slovak econ minister to talk about increasing Russia sanctions and technology export controls. So these are things, as you think about careers and you think about ways to get involved, no matter how old you are, there's a lot of different options, you know, even if you're just volunteering your time. But again, that you know, that research component is a really important factor in making good policy prescriptions and hopefully good policy decisions. I will point out that this is a picture of the library that I'm sitting on top of right now. I'm right above this in this office up here. So you want to get a sense of where I am. Okay, so let's see. Okay, so the question is, how good is humanity at harnessing the energy potential around us? Does anyone want to, I'll just throw it out there. Anyone want to give, are we good at this? Are we bad at this? For all of Earth, are we good at using energy? Thumbs up, thumbs down. Okay, I don't know if we're going to get any, I can't see the chat, by the way, so I'm not sure if there's anyone writing in there. Answer is, we're not that good, not advanced. Humanity mostly sets fire to buried organic materials that represents oil and gas and things like that. That drives resource competition and geopolitical tensions across the globe. There's this scale called the Kardashev scale that was built up or was proposed a number of decades ago by an astrophysicist who basically said, you know, the types of civilizations that humanity could become or is or could become, and it goes type 1, type 2, type 3. We're not even type 1 in terms of energy usage, a type 1 civilization. Carl Sagan, the famous astrophysicist from Cornell University here in the United States, says that we're about a 0.7 on this scale, meaning that we only can harness about 0.7 or 70%, let's say, we can harness about 70% of the energy resources on Earth. And so we're nowhere near a type 2 civilization, which would put something like a Dyson sphere around a star. This notion that you could, you know, kind of have this shell of material that would better absorb solar radiation and then basically capture all of that and move it to a planet to use. And we're absolutely nowhere near a type 3 civilization that can harness all the energy potential that's in our galaxy, the Milky Way. So this is just to get a sense of energy security at the most macro scale possible. And in astrophysical terms, we're not doing that well. But what can we do with what we have is the question. So what is energy security and how does it impact geopolitical and economic conditions worldwide? I don't know if we can get someone that would like to venture and say what they think energy security is, but Lisa, I don't know. What do you think? Can we get audience participation or?
Yeah, we can try. If somebody wants to speak about it, you can obviously raise your hand and we will unmute you. You can try to unmute yourself, or you can write it in the chat as well.
Just one sentence. Let's get a sentence from somebody. Okay, Alexander, Sasha, what do you think energy security is?
Like energy security is approach which every country uses to like have enough resources for energy which it needs, like something like that. Like for example, if you don't have if a country doesn't have enough like fuel or petrol, we understand that there would be a big crisis in this country. So energy security is like a policy which has to prevent such things.
Excellent, excellent. That's a great definition. Anyone else want to just add to that before we move on?
There are two answers in the chat, if I may. Anna Fesek is writing that energy security is one of the key national interests. Obviously, I believe that's true. And Zahar Denisenko is writing that it is a global ability to provide proper, accessible abundance of energy to global population on a sustainable basis.
All correct answers. It's a very wide field. And so that's why these are all true and all part of a much broader picture. So that's energy security in general. What does energy security policy require? I really believe that it is a multidisciplinary field that includes all of the following here, and I'll go through what these are. One is understanding the energy and project development of any piece of energy infrastructure, because no matter what you're building, it has a significant project development path. And if you're developing policies to interface with that energy infrastructure or to support it, you need to know how it's built, at least at a broad level, and how long it takes to build, how much money it takes to build these pieces of infrastructure and projects. And if you're trying to stop a project, if you're trying to sanction something, understand how long the project has left to be built, so that if you want to sanction it, you know how long you have before it's too late to sanction something. I would argue it's never too late to sanction something. It may sometimes be better to do it earlier, though. Basic science and technology, of course, all of any part of the energy value chain, whether we're talking about hydrocarbons, renewables, or future energy technologies like fusion or something like that. Of course, also conventional nuclear power plants that run on fission energy all have a significant science and technology component. So that's important to consider. Geopolitics of energy and national security issues, that's what we're here talking about today, but that is a significant aspect of energy security policy, how energy insecurity can drive the ability of nations to either have a decision-making process that's impacted by energy insecurity, and understand what their foreign policy latitude is with certain countries and certain regions given energy dependencies. And we can talk about that, but certainly the question of at the outset of the large-scale invasion of Ukraine last year, the foreign policy latitude of the European nations, especially in Western Europe, was more limited than what it could have been if there was a energy level of independence from its traditional dependency on Russian hydrocarbons. So that's something we can talk about today. Economic market analysis, I would sometimes call this the Bloomberg terminal approach, when you're looking at energy security in terms of the actual market prices of these resources, whether they're talking about hydrocarbons, oil and gas, or technologies, solar panels, wind arrays, things like this. Understanding how the electricity market works and how the natural gas and oil markets work and what their pricing are, very important, but it's only a component of this. And I think that some analysts get this wrong sometimes by only looking at energy security or vetting energy projects in terms of pure economic value. There certainly is a energy security component of projects, both good and bad. And if you want to have anyone that wants to have energy security in their nation understands immediately that energy security isn't free. Legal and regulatory analysis. We'll go through this in a few minutes with the EU Third Energy Package and things like this, but you really need to have a well-functioning anti-monopoly and market liberalized environment to run energy infrastructure. And so legal and regulatory analysis is very important. Data science and open source geospatial intelligence, very important, especially in the example of what's been going on in Ukraine over the past 18 months. Russia's illegal invasion and aggression against Ukraine has targeted critical infrastructure and energy infrastructure, to the extent that last November, on November 18th, the NASA Worldview, sorry?
Like,
Hello?
I guess somebody has turned
Oh.
on them. by
Okay,
mistake,
sorry. Yeah, sorry. Okay, I didn't know someone was asking a question. So you have a situation in which geospatial satellites operating in low Earth orbit imaged Ukraine and could see that its electricity grid was damaged and much dark, showing much more darkness in the country than the countries around it. Again, showing the extent and the scale of Russia's overt aggression against Ukraine, and in particular Ukrainian energy security in this case. So understanding that, we can talk about that later as well, but the role that space plays in the energy security game globally, but also in Ukraine and in Europe, and understanding networks of foreign influence and their motives, elite capture, strategic corruption, the Schroederization of Europe. These are all part and parcel to Russia's malign energy activities across the continent, and trying to get geopolitical concessions and from their weaponization of their energy. So that's important to understand as well. Obviously, fluency in disinformation analysis, that is a very key element of Russia's hybrid arsenal, and something that has to be understood and debunked and pushed back on. I know Ukraine is very good at this, and very good at understanding how to push back on this, and much, much more. In other words, there is a lot going on in this field. So there's a lot of ways to analyze energy security. There's a lot of ways to go about it, a lot of ways to get into the field. I would say from this should not feel overwhelming, like you have to be an expert in all of these areas. I don't think anyone is. I'm certainly not. But you have to have an appreciation that these are all a part of the whole, which is to say that you have to move them in a multidisciplinary manner into your analysis and take account of them as you try to come up with policies to bolster Europe's energy security. So 5 pillars of European energy security. I always say there's 5 pillars of European energy security. It is not a standard. I tell my students that this is certainly not something that's in a textbook someplace, at least not that I'm aware of. But this is how I personally think about European energy security and how I cordon off the various areas of it. But you can have different definitions, but I think that it's pretty clear that these are the main areas of energy security. So the most straightforward ones to think about are hardware development. So you're going to develop hardware and software. Hardware development means energy infrastructure, and so you need to diversify source countries where you're importing either electricity or hydrocarbons or critical minerals or energy technologies from. Delivery routes, the routes they actually take to get there, whether it's pipelines, whether it's ships, whether it's electricity cables, cross-border cables, and things like this. Very, very important to have a diversity of those. And then fuel types, all the way through the value chain from the good old, bad old days of pure hydrocarbon for energy to the promising future of a mix of nuclear and renewables, so that we can actually address the climate crisis and push back on the ill effects of climate change, which we're certainly seeing around the globe more and more with extreme weather events that we've seen over the past 4 months in particular in the Northern Hemisphere. And then, of course, in the future, continue to have science and technology development for future energy technologies. I always harp on the fact that fusion is a potential future baseload. It often has the old refrain that fusion is 40 years away, and it's been 40 years away for 40 years. But the amount of money that's been put into fusion compared to hydrocarbons, compared to oil and gas, compared to even any renewable energy technologies is a pittance, very small amount, and something that we can all resolve to increase our investments in. Of course, natural gas in particular is something that we focus on in European energy security. Russia has used natural gas to great effect to weaponize energy dependency that they've built up across the continent over the years to try to get geopolitical and regional security concessions. in a way that harms the national security and national interest of a given nation. Certainly during the Soviet era, Russia built out infrastructure in a much different way than you saw in the West. In the West, you can see and still see these effects of a very well diversified and networked market, that you have an open market that is liberalized and opening and operating via a free market economy, whereas in the Soviet past, there was basically trunk lines built to the various satellite states of the Warsaw Pact of the Soviet Union, so that Russia could, as I've heard folks in energy security say, kind of play the keys of the piano, decide individual nations that they could cut off or regions that could be cut off to extract geopolitical concessions. That is why Central and Eastern Europe, in particular NATO's eastern flank countries, have really focused on building out what they've called the North-South gas corridor for many years, the North-South infrastructure corridor more recently, and then the Three Seas initiative. And certainly Ukraine has benefited from those pushes to get more infrastructure in the North-South direction, and including energy infrastructure to kind of market liberalize and more network energy infrastructure that in the past was basically built to client states from Russia to various satellite states. Okay, so that's all the hardware, but you can have the most diversified hardware in the world, and if you don't have good market liberalization policies, it's not going to work very well. It's not going to create a resilient energy mix. So the EU third energy package, very important, and I know that this is something that Ukraine already is trying to comply with more and more as it continues its process towards eventual and hopefully soon European accession, of course also NATO accession, but this is in particular focused on European Union accession. So that means that main principles have to be abided by. Number one, ownership unbundling. That's the unbundling of vertically integrated enterprises. So you can't have one company or state-owned enterprise or entity or ministry own a piece of infrastructure in a way that the means of production, so like let's say an oil pipeline from Russia, you can't have a company like Rosneft or Gazprom in the case of gas own the means of production, the fields, have that then fed into a pipeline, something like Nord Stream 2, and then so that then get that down to the member states to disperse or send out to various industries as the means of distribution. So again, upstream is the means of production, midstream is the transport of the resource, and downstream is the distribution. So you can't have one company or entity owning all three because that creates a monopoly, a natural monopoly. So in this case, you have ownership unbundling as part of EU third energy package. Third-party access means that one company can't own and operate the entirety of a piece of infrastructure. Have to also have transparent retail markets, national regulatory authorities, and then in each nation, and then of course you have ACER, which is the regulatory authority at the EU level that can help to push the national regulators to institute these policies. So Lisa, I saw your hand was up and maybe there's a question.
I'm sorry, Benjamin. I wanted to ask you if you could go a bit like not so fast because it's a bit hard for our Christina to translate.
Oh, sure. Yes. Sorry.
Possible. Thank you.
Yep. Not a problem. Okay. So that's that. That's the regulatory side. Energy and critical infrastructure protection. So cyber attacks are one area, physical attacks are another area. You can have the most regulated, diversified and well-functioning market, but if you have a cyber attack that takes down your infrastructure, if you have a physical attack that takes down your infrastructure, these will really only create infrastructure that's effectively a statue. Certainly, the Nord Stream bombings last year made it very clear the threat that that is posed by critical infrastructure threats to from physical security sources. but cyber is also an issue, and this is something that I've been looking into a lot more in terms of offshore critical infrastructure protection in the North and Baltic Seas, cables, pipelines, and things like this. Is that better pace? Sorry. I'll keep try to keep it steady. I have a problem in any language trying to speak too fast. That's on me. But I appreciate the translation, of course. 4, advancing operational energy security objectives in support of NATO military security objectives. NATO's enhanced forward presence and continued operations along NATO's eastern flank need to be well supplied by fuels, including specialty fuels that source energy for produce energy for things like aircraft and things like that. You also have to have an extension, I believe, of the NATO pipeline network, which you can see on the right, this map, that NATO's pipeline network of dedicated pipes for oil and refined products that are used by NATO, used for NATO operations, still doesn't extend all the way to NATO's eastern flank, and that's got to change. So that's something we need to think about in the future. And then finally, the fifth pillar here is countering Russian malign influence and disinformation campaigns that target the European energy sector and transatlantic energy trade. On one side, it's pretty obvious you have Russia pushing disinformation campaigns when it came to the Nord Stream 2 pipeline, when it comes to European energy security in general, pointing out that, trying to make the case that Ukraine is an unreliable partner, that the United States is an unreliable partner, that the United States is only about, making money, doesn't care about Europe's energy security, and all of these sort of narratives that, unfortunately, some European member states, including Germany, were only too happy to basically repeat as well if it happens to support their views on Nord Stream 2, for example. But the problem is Russia amplifies these divisions, and whether or not they are true, tries to push them out and make them sources of disinformation. And so that's something that we have to be very vigilant about going forward. At the same time, I mentioned a few times the Schroederization of Europe, this case of former German Chancellor Gerhard Schroeder, who in 2005 left office and in early 2006 took a position on the board of Nord Stream AG as its chairman, having approved Nord Stream, the first pipeline, while in office, and stepping out and immediately taking a position working for a Russian state-owned enterprise, has become one of, I often hear people say he's one of Russia's key Trojan horses in Europe. It really, I think, undermines the efficacy of and cleverness of the Greek army having built a Trojan horse, because you can see this guy coming. This is not something that's hidden in a Trojan horse. This is very clear. It's very overt. So pushing pro-Kremlin narratives and then getting rewarded for this by getting pushed to be on the or offered to be on the board of Rosneft, the Russian state-owned oil company. It's not just Schroeder. Over the years, this includes Austria's ex-finance minister, Hans-Jörg Schelling, who stepped out of office and became a senior advisor for Nord Stream 2 AG. Austria's ex-chancellor, Christian Kern, who penned a letter against U.S. sanctions on Nord Stream 2 in particular, and did this as a joint letter with Sigmar Gabriel, the former vice chancellor of Germany, who pushed back on U.S. sanctions and supported Nord Stream 2. He got a job after leaving office on Russian state-owned Russian railways. I will add that Sigmar Gabriel, who pushed for Nord Stream 2 his entire time in office, is now the head of the Atlantikbrücke, which is the organization that is supporting U.S.-German ties. And it's I always think somewhat ironic that he ended up there, having been such a pro-Russian energy voice while in office. I also, of course, will have to point out Karen Kneissl, the former Austrian foreign minister, who danced with Putin at her wedding, was offered and accepted, at least for a period of time, a position on the board of Rosneft, the Russian state-owned oil company. And then Francois Fillon, the former Prime Minister of France, last year took a position not on one but two Russian state-owned oil and gas trading companies. Many of these folks have been shamed into leaving those positions, but not all of them. Because again, in European jurisdictions in particular, this isn't necessarily illegal. So it's maybe called strategic corruption, but it's not necessarily illegal in these jurisdictions. And so this is why I went before U.S. Congress, excuse me, U.S. Congress back last year and called for what I defined at the time with colleagues as the SHAME Act, the Stop Helping America's Malign Enemies Act, or SHAME, because if small case shame doesn't stop these folks from supporting Putin's regime, then we need to make it against the law to go work for Russian state-owned enterprises. Frankly, we need to make it against the law to work for any authoritarian nation's state-owned enterprises after leaving the public trust in a democracy. Not doing so will only undermine our democratic resilience going forward. That bill did get proposed, the name changed to Stop Helping Adversaries Malign or Meddle in Everything Act. Still shame, but something that we need to keep pushing, not only in the United States, but across the continent. It would be great if Ukraine could pass such a measure in line with this as well. I'm going to skip over the deep dive on Nord Stream 2. I think everyone has heard about this. We can certainly talk about it in the discussion, and just basically go to what happened last year. The Nord Stream pipe, Nord Stream 2, basically was sanctioned very late in the process, just 12 hours or 24 hours before the large-scale invasion happened. Unfortunately, the Biden administration took far too long to deploy what it was and is when they arrived. Bipartisan law, not proposed policy, but a law that was passed by U.S. Congress by both Democrats and Republicans that would force any administration to sanction Nord Stream 2. But they did ultimately do so. It did result in the liquidation of the company itself, at least on paper. It sounds like they are still fighting to remain out of bankruptcy in Switzerland, but we will see where that goes. Of course, there was the sabotage incident against Nord Stream 1 and Nord Stream 2 in late September of last year. I just got back from a large or a long research trip around the Baltic Sea, talking to experts and officials, etc., about this this situation. Many, if not all of them, strongly contest the notion that a so-called pro-Ukrainian sailboat could have done such an operation, not only from a motivation standpoint, but from a technical standpoint. And there will be a report coming out from us soon on this front, so stay tuned. And so that's important to remember. And it's also important to remember, as we think about that story, that the Nordic public broadcasters, their equivalent of our NPR or PBS or something like this, came out with a report in the spring of last year that showed that not one but six, up to six Russian subsea capable vessels or support vessels were on site where the blasts took place just 48 hours before they took place. So again, the motivation and the means are what we have to remember in a situation like that. And certainly Russia had both in spades on and around the pipeline. So sanctions, we need to do a lot more. I'm going to leave sanctions for the Q&A because I think folks will have thoughts and in things that we can talk about. I will just say the price cap, it's good that we have a price cap. It would be better if it was much lower. It should be around $30 a barrel. So that's just above the marginal cost of production for Russian Urals grade oil. $60 is far too high. And this needs to happen. And ultimately, we need to be cutting off every avenue for macroeconomic support that the Russian Federation has right now to the greatest extent possible. It also cutting off their access to advanced technologies through technology export controls. So that's basically where we're at. I'd like to talk about sanctions, talk about energy security, and talk about Ukrainian energy resiliency and critical infrastructure protection, especially going into this winter as we go through the Q&A. But I just want to thank you for listening to this talk and open to questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Benjamin. That was super interesting and also clear, because I'm a person without energy background at all, and like I could understand it, I could get into it, identify all the topics we need to get. So thank you very much for clarifying this. And now I'd like to open the Q&A session. If you want to ask Benjamin a question, you can raise your hand. There is a function in Zoom for this, or you can also type it in the chat. So you can type it either in English or in Ukrainian. We will translate it or just read it as it is. As Benjamin has mentioned, he already has some topics for Q&A discussion, including sanctions, Ukrainian energy resilience and stuff. So you can basically ask questions about those, or come up with some of them. And I see already the first question by Anna Fesik, and she's asking, has the gradual implementation of green energy affected Russian energy leverage in any way?
It can, but it hasn't, I would say, been deployed at a level necessary to really have a macroeconomic impact on Russia yet, especially since natural gas is seen by many countries, and I think rightly so, as a bridge fuel, something that is slightly better than burning other hydrocarbons like coal or oil products for energy production. So I would say not yet, but it can. If we get more and more renewable energy technologies deployed, the more each nation can become much less dependent on not only the Russian Federation and other authoritarian energy producers, but of other nations in general. And the hydrocarbon dependence will be cut. The piggy bank that Putin is getting energy money from will be broken. But of course, at that point, we're also having to be clear that we don't want to become dependent on critical minerals or other technologies like we see, key in solar panels, for example, from other authoritarian nations, for example, the People's Republic of China. Something that we have to keep in mind. But so the answer is no, but we need to do more, so that the answer is yes.
Okay, thank you very much. I also seen 2 hands raised and another question is in the chat. I will start with the hands. Daria Panova.
Yes, it's me. Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Benjamin. So my question, I would like to start with the statement that Russia still tries to blackmail Europe with second Nord Stream. And my question is, how do you think what further action should be from the Ukrainian side and European side to stop or not to react on such like blackmailing, or how to stop such action from Russian side, and what to do at all? Thank you.
Thank you, Daria. That's a great question. I think that the biggest thing that Ukraine can do on that front to push back on Russian energy weaponization across Europe is to remind nations constantly, every day, if necessary, that there can be no return to energy business as usual, quote unquote, energy business as usual with Putin's Kremlin, ever, period. I've heard rumors that, there are certainly firms and possibly governments that would like to resume certain imports of Russian natural gas. Certainly there's a concern that the so-called Turkish gas hub that Putin proposed to President Erdogan in Ankara some time ago, 6 months ago or so, that if that is set up in a way that allows for more Russian gas to get to Turkey, that gas would be effectively whitewashed or renamed as Turkish gas, right? Take a lot of Russian gas, send it to Turkey. Now it's Turkish gas. And then countries in Southeastern Europe and beyond can start to import that gas, where it's really being effectively rerouted from the Russian Federation through Turkey back to Europe, which will only make the Kremlin more money to enhance its war of aggression against Ukraine. So we need to remember that there can't be a return to business as usual. The Nord Stream pipelines can't be rebuilt. Yamal cannot come back. And the last pipeline system that should be shut down is the Ukrainian gas transmission network. That is actually right now only the only main avenue for Russian gas direct imports to Europe right now, but it forces Gazprom to pay the Ukrainian government, which can underpin part of its economy, but it can't be seen as a long-term thing. That's got to end as well, ultimately. But it should be, if there's the last door to close, the last light to turn off, it should be the Ukrainian gas transmission network. I hope that answers the question, Zarya.
But sometimes, may I add something?
Sure.
But sometimes, as for me, it's hard to persuade people from Europe that it's harmful to use Russian gas, and sometimes they has their own national interest, so-called, and they would like maybe not to be cold at winter, but then like help Ukraine, like maybe to avoid more confrontation, something like that. How to overcome this, and another, how to say this, maybe rumors, these thoughts, how to overcome, like maybe even for us, a lot of Ukrainian people are now in Europe, they live there, they communicate with Europeans, how like on that level, how they may influence the European people.
Well, I think exactly what you're doing. Unfortunately, the argument is very obvious. The more that you buy Russian energy from Putin's Kremlin, the more money that Russia will have to fund its military aggression and adventurism abroad, first and foremost, certainly against Ukraine. So I think that basically just keeping a steady drumbeat of talking points, of getting this in the media, and of making sure that as any country or company or et cetera tries to resume former ties or former business as usual on energy with Putin's Kremlin, that it is named and shamed. Unfortunately, it's going to go to the press, talk about it, and make sure that the public understands what's going on. That is, I think, the only way to deter policymakers in certain areas of Europe and companies in certain areas of Europe from breaking sanctions consensus, which we, of course, haven't seen yet to a great scale. There are certain examples, certainly, for example, Hungary importing Russian oil still, for example, via pipeline. But to a great extent, at least the greatest that we've ever seen, there has been unity on a lot of these areas. But I have serious doubts that that will remain in place forever. And let's be clear, it's not to say that there could never be an energy relationship between Europe and Russia in the future, but it would have to be a Russia that is significantly different and abiding by international market regulations, liberal democratic norms, and things like this. In other words, not Putin's Kremlin and not some successor that abides by Putinism, authoritarianism. So this is a long-term commitment, I think, by the transatlantic community, in particular by European nations. And it needs to be clear that this isn't some sort of short-term sanctions contingency for the duration of this war, but rather something that has to go on for some time. So I will stop with that.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. The next question was, again, the raised hand by Tatiana Shelest.
Yeah, thank you, Benjamin, for the great lecture. I loved it. And my question is, what are the main steps that Ukrainian government may take in near time period to strengthen our energy security?
Well, I think the biggest thing that we can do to support Ukrainian energy security is the same thing that I said last year going into the winter. It's unfortunately not a lot of the things that I mentioned in my talk. In this case, it is air defense. It is a functional military system that can help protect Ukrainian energy and critical infrastructure assets on the ground. I know that the Ukrainian government, in particular, the armed forces of Ukraine, have done a lot and learned a lot over the past 18 months, tragically, of course, but have learned a lot and put into place a lot of systems and methods to better protect critical infrastructure, you know, both through physical protection, cyber protections, and the bottom line is more air defense is needed. It's always needed, and something that the West needs to continue to help Ukraine with. The transatlantic community continues to need to have this steady, not only supply of you know, anti-aircraft, anti-missile defense weapons, but also build those out, have more launchers and more Patriot batteries and things like this. So it's really important. And if you think it's really expensive, and if you think that's really, you know, if you, not you personally, but if someone who doubts the need to do this, or the, you know, the importance of it, and says, oh, it's very expensive to provide these sort of systems. Well, think of the alternative: Russia destroying more and more of Ukraine's critical infrastructure, which will have to be rebuilt in the future. And so, of course, we should support that rebuilding with Western taxpayer dollars. But before we even do that, there's got to be a reckoning, finally, to use Russian frozen assets to pay for the damage, because the perpetrator of the crime, in this case Russia, needs to pay for the crime. So that's what I would say there, Tatiana.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. We have the next question received in the chat from Olena Sas. How do you estimate the readiness of Ukrainian energy system to pass through the upcoming winter?
That's a question I have for all of you. I would like to go to Ukraine soon and meet folks on the ground on this topic, but I got to tell you, I don't have a good assessment of that done personally yet. But as I said, Ukraine has learned a lot over the past year on how to better protect infrastructure from Russian methods of targeting and kinetic strikes. And so again, the armed forces of Ukraine, and of course, not to mention, or absolutely important to mention, the heroic work of Ukrainian utility workers that are constantly rebuilding and fixing damaged infrastructure, sometimes, you know, just minutes after strikes happen. So that is something that needs to be commended as a heroic action. It's something that is important to stave off and stop from humanitarian disaster beyond the state that it already is, which is tragic in Ukraine. And so I think that, again, the armed forces of Ukraine, utility workers, energy companies need to come together and continue to learn and build out the systems and methods that have so far shown their efficacy in defending Ukrainian infrastructure from strikes. At the same time, the transatlantic community needs to continue to rapidly source, find, build up supply chains, build up manufacturing chains as much as possible for all of the systems, components, and parts that are needed to swap in for damaged infrastructure or to repair damaged infrastructure. So that's really important as well.
Okay, thank you. The next question, it's both in the chat, and I guess Zahar Denisenko wants to speak about it. So Zahar, feel free to unmute yourself.
Yes, I also have a different question, which I would like to put on a higher priority. Benjamin, as far as understood, in 2018, you have, on behalf of the US government, worked or cooperated with the Ukrainian energy sector. And in this regard, my question is, how would you assess the effectiveness of the Ukrainian state-owned companies in the energy sector? For example, Naftogaz, Ukraine. How would you assess these?
Sorry, it's a good, I mean, that's a great question, but assess in what manner? In what way?
For instance, could have they done more to extract the Ukrainian energy resources more properly? For instance, I believe that we are not properly extracting our gas resources, which we have enough to It's my understanding. You can correct me if I'm wrong. Please do.
I don't want to go too much in depth on the state of the Ukrainian energy sector right now, especially because it's in such a an interim state. I would say, given the war contingency that's going on. I will say the thing that we worked on most with our counterparts in the Ukrainian energy sector when I was in government is anti-corruption and things like this, but also getting those EU energy regulations in place, working with the European Energy Community Secretariat, which sits in Vienna, working with the Energy Commission, the European Commission Energy Directorate, DG Energy in Brussels, and working with the member states to make sure that that the state-owned enterprises that were set up in the Soviet era that they are properly broken up in terms of the ownership unbundling, third-party access, and all of those sort of things. And that's something that's gone forward, right? Naftogaz spun off the gas transmission system operator of Ukraine, GTSOU, and that sort of step and others like it to better integrate with the European legal, EU legal and regulatory environment will only help Ukraine accede to the European Union as a member state faster. Frankly, I would argue that the largest macroeconomic area to define and deploy and get these regulations going is indeed in the energy sector in Ukraine. And so that's why it was so important that work was started back then in the mid 2010s and now is continuing. I mean, we saw at the start of the large scale invasion, the synchronization of the electricity grid in Ukraine with Europe. And that's something that we really would have assessed would have taken many, many years, but because of the hard work and bravery and risk tolerance to get this done, in the face of military onslaught from the Kremlin, it happened, and it's really important because that's another step that would have to happen for Ukrainian member state accession to the EU. So these are just examples. That's for probably a full deep dive on the state of the Ukrainian energy sector could take weeks and weeks at this point, but we'll leave it at that for now.
Great, thank you for the answer. And we also have a question from Yar in the chat, which I'm also looking for an answer for. When will Russian liquefied gas finally come under sanctions?
Hopefully yesterday. I would have hoped it was yesterday, but the best day besides yesterday is today or tomorrow. So it should happen. I think that, frankly, Russian natural gas should be sanctioned. And this is exactly why I said, keep the discussion going. Don't let folks off the hook in Europe, in other areas of the world that are importing Russian natural gas, that they can return to business as usual. Certainly Russian liquefied natural gas has been, I would say, a glaring loophole in the spirit of the even if they're not under sanctions, but spirit of the policy, and something that needs to be addressed soon, and as soon as possible rather than later. So unfortunately, it hasn't happened already. I think it really should happen. If you look at the charts of the amount of Russian liquefied natural gas that's now coming into the EU, it certainly isn't zero, and that's what we really need to see in the future. So doing that, but also making sure that the EU is ready to get through the winter itself. Because again, if the EU becomes energy insecure, it won't have the foreign policy latitude to continue supporting Ukraine at the level it is now. It certainly needs to support Ukraine even more. And so this is why we need to balance the asks that we have of the Europeans with the reality of what's in their gas storages. But that doesn't mean we shouldn't push for it anyways. We absolutely should. And so that's my motto on this.
Thank you very much for that. We also, I believe we should finish around like 15 minutes, and we still have 3 people, so let's try to make it. Alexandra Andreeva, you can unmute yourself.
Yeah, I hope you can hear me though, because I had some issues with the internet today. So you mentioned several times about the independence concerning the general energy security. And I remembered, especially in the first months of war, when there were negotiations concerning lifting sanctions, for example, from Iran, Iraq, Venezuela. And when we are talking about independence from Russian gas, won't it be from the policy standpoint that we are stepping away from one regime to the others, to make sure that this model would work out without causing any more issues, because there are obviously some countries who cannot be independent on themselves, and they are not part of any kind of like EU, or they are not part of any kind of regional organization that can offer any substitutes?
Yeah, Alexandra, that's a great question, and it dovetails into what I said earlier about renewables. This is exactly why we need to proliferate renewables as fast as possible, because it doesn't then force you into a position between import of authoritarian Russian gas and instead then importing it from another country. Certainly, lifting sanctions on an authoritarian regime like Venezuela may have been seen as a way to have a stopgap in the energy market if Russia started cutting oil production, et cetera, and things like this. But again, that's really kind of a concern. It's if you're on a boat that is sinking and there are 5 holes in it, let's say, letting in water, and each of those 5 holes represent a authoritarian nation you're dependent on for energy. Taking one plug and moving it around, that your boat's still gonna sink ultimately, and the boat would represent democracy and democratic resilience. So we really can't go from dependency on one authoritarian regime like the Russian Federation and move it to another. We really need to continue to rapidly invest in science and technology and in renewables to get away from the authoritarian energy trap, number one, and ultimately become more democratically resilient in the process.
Thank you. Yeah.
Thank you very much for answering this, and thank you to Alexandra for the question. And we have Ostap Yednak. You can unmute yourself.
Hello, Benjamin. Thank you very much for this great overview and great lecture and presentation. And this inspired me, but also got me frustrated, all these energy things, because if you make some sanctions or price caps, etc., the energy flows to other markets. And we can see India increasing imports of Russian oil, 20 times, maybe more, and China also increasing imports, probably oil and gas, etc. And it also goes to the previous question that there are authoritarian regimes which are exporting energy and exporting malign influence, and getting into these unions, and how can we stop it? Because even though if Europe goes and transits into renewables, then these countries which will be growing faster and faster, they will be consuming more energy, they will be producing products, oil products, but also other products, and shipping to the countries which are using renewables. In illegal timber trade, we have FSC, Forest Stewardship Council, and chain of custody. There have been questions about carbon tax. Will be maybe possible to discuss some additional traceability systems to impose some sanctions or influence on those countries who gain from cheaper energy sources from authoritarian regime, and basically support this malign influence, support this regime, and get additional gains from processing goods from cheaper energy and sending it to the developed countries and markets, to rich countries.
Well, Ostap, first of all, let me say, it looks like you're calling in from an M.C. Escher painting, if you get that reference, with all the stairs kind of look like they're upside down. So that's great. And it's great to see you. Thank you. It's a great question. I don't have a good answer for that, given that what you're describing is a global policy issue. I think that we need to understand that right now we are in a struggle, both a hybrid struggle across the broader West, a hot military struggle in Ukraine with the Russian Federation, and so I think we need to just continue to focus on mounting more and more energy, in particular energy and technology sanctions on the Russian Federation. Part of the way to build this out would be to open up the aperture of secondary sanctions so that nations can't basically serve as intermediaries for Russian energy to get out into the global market, and that would be at a significant benefit outside of a price cap regime or something like this. To make Putin money to continue his large-scale invasion of Ukraine. So that's the short term. That's a hard task in its own right in the short term. The longer term issues about this, I don't want to just say we have to see where the chips may fall in the future in terms of these other contingencies you're referencing, but there has to be a greater understanding that energy dependency is a global issue. It is a global national security issue. It's not a nice to have in policy discussions. It's a must have. And it's something that each country is going to have to start balancing more and more as we go forward, as we go through the energy transition to a decarbonized future, but also thinking about geopolitical and national security issues. So I guess to answer your specific question, yes, we should be rolling out secondary sanctions to make sure that companies and entities in countries that are third party and are not allowing for technology export controls or re-export into Russia. It's not really an energy point, but a broader point in terms of components, systems, and subsystems that can be used and repurposed for Russian military equipment. That's got to stop, has to stop, and stop as quickly as possible. And at the same time, we need to make sure that that these supply chains of energy that are being built up outside of direct import to the EU by Russia aren't benefiting Russia in any significant way, or minimizing and diminishing that benefit as much as possible, so that we can push for the macroeconomic failures that are necessary to get Putin and the Kremlin elite to rethink their disastrous war of choice against a democratic nation in Ukraine.
Thank you very much. And we have one last question. It's a bit related to the previous one. So Yulia Stroich is asking, would it be possible to prolong sanctions against Russian energy sector to cut them out of the world market on oil and gas? Or is it possible that in 15 or 10 years, Europe would return to its old habits? Is there any way to prevent the Chinese way of France and Germany?
10 or 15 years, try 10 or 15 minutes. I think that there are a significant amount of individuals and entities that I'm sure behind the scenes are pushing for this already. And that's something that we need to keep an eye out for and push back on vociferously, very strongly as it happens, because there will be countries and companies that are pushing for a return to business as usual with Putin's Kremlin, and something that we really need to stop them from doing, whether it be through infrastructure development that they're doing or market choices. Can't happen. The Turkish gas hub is a good example. I'm sure there will be more and more countries and entities that are trying to revive the old pipeline import ways of getting Russian natural gas. Because they were so addicted and it was so endemic to their political system for so long that it's something that I would be shocked if it does not come back. So anyone who reads the headlines that Europe has weathered the storm and has weaned itself off of its Russian energy dependence, we need to give credit where credit's due. It happened last year. Europe got through the winter. Europe looks like it's going to be set up well to get through the winter again. But that does not mean that the dependency and the risk of dependency from Russia is over. I think quite the opposite. this is the sort of environment that Russia thrives in, where people aren't really looking at it strongly. I think that the lesson has been well taken, and the problem is over. This is where it comes back, and so we need to be making very clear in policy statements, in advocacy statements, whatever you are working on in analysis, in academia, in policy, etc., that there cannot be a return to business as usual, Putin's Kremlin. So again, not 10 to 15 years, maybe not 10 to 15 minutes either, but in the coming months, I think this is going to be something we really need to be fighting against.
Thank you very much, Benjamin. And I would also like to thank our participants for such a heated discussion on the energy sector, which is super important nowadays. If I may, I would like to conclude the lecture. Thank you very much again for your time, for deep puzzling this complicated topic, and for explaining its importance to us. I hope we can still keep in touch for our school next events, and we would also inform the participants in a Telegram group or via the emails you left us about the next lecture in the course. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you. Slava Ukraini.
Героям слава.
Героям слава. Thank you, Benjamin.
Thank
That
you
was
very
great.
much.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Osap. Thank you, Lisa. Thank you, everybody. Have a nice weekend.